The cave behind them was silent now. Lupellin was gone, the prisoners freed, and the worst of it over. Lloyd led the group down the forest path, the late afternoon sun filtering through the trees above. The rescued men followed behind him, carrying what supplies they could, though some moved slower than others. One soldier in particular was struggling. The pack on his back sagged under its weight, his legs unsteady from days spent in chains. He gritted his teeth, trying to keep pace, but it was clear he was barely holding up. Lloyd looked back. He called out, telling the man to hand over his bag. The soldier shook his head, insisting he could manage. Lloyd clicked his tongue and furrowed his brow. If the man collapsed, he'd have to carry both him and the supplies. If it was going to end that way anyway, he might as well take it now. He reached out and took the bag anyway. Then he turned to the others and told them to hand over theirs too. They hesitated. A few even tried to protest. Lloyd didn't give them the chance. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Grudgingly, the rest of the men handed over their loads. Lloyd tied the bags together, ignoring their mutters that they could still carry their own. Once everything was secured, he slung the bundle over his back with a grunt, and then, with a casual glance over his shoulder, warned them that if he heard another word, their bonuses were getting slashed. That was enough to quiet them down. The men stared at him, stunned. Some looked ready to cry. Javier, walking a few paces behind, narrowed his eyes. He couldn't tell if Lloyd actually believed he might need to carry one of them, or if it was just an excuse to help without looking soft. Whatever the truth, the men clearly believed the latter. To them, Master Lloyd was more than just a noble or commander. He was someone they'd follow without question. Then the system chimed in. The rescued soldiers have been deeply moved by your actions. Through their words, your deeds are spreading far and wide. Wasn't this a rewarding experience? Lloyd didn't slow down. He rolled his eyes at the prompt. If there was no profit involved, he couldn't care less. Some time had passed since their return. Construction at the orc camp was nearly complete, and the new building stood tall at the edge of the clearing, solid, sturdy, and well built. Inside, Arosh paced slowly across the stone floor. He looked around, taking in the space with a satisfied nod, until his expression turned uncertain. He turned to Lloyd. It was only slightly cooler in here than it was outside. How was this going to preserve meat? Lloyd didn't look concerned. He told Arosh they just needed to bring the ice in first. Arosh blinked. Ice? There wasn't a shred of snow or frost anywhere nearby. Where exactly was Lloyd planning to get ice? Lloyd smiled. He was going to make some. Arosh frowned, unconvinced. How? Lloyd kept smiling and simply said he'd find a way. That didn't help. As if picking up on Arosh's doubts, the system chimed in with perfect timing. Did he bring a con man back to the village? Was the story about the queen ant all a lie? Arosh is not as stupid as Lloyd thinks he is. Shut up, Lloyd thought. You can't actually read minds, you're just messing with me. Arosh gave him a side eye, but didn't push it. He shook his head. Maybe he shouldn't doubt Lloyd so quickly. After all, this was the same man who had pulled him out of a cave full of ants. He turned to leave, calling over his shoulder that if Lloyd needed anything, all he had to do was ask. Once Arosh was gone, Javier turned toward Lloyd. So how exactly did he plan to make ice? Lloyd didn't answer right away. He hesitated, then muttered that it was a good question, one he was definitely in the middle of figuring out. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He glanced at Javier and casually asked what he thought they should do. Javier's expression twisted in disbelief. He stared at Lloyd. Had he seriously promised ice to the orcs without even knowing if he could do it? Was this really the plan? Bluff first, figure it out later? Was he planning to con them? Lloyd turned, straightened his shoulders and told Javier to listen closely. What was the one thing unsuccessful people had in common? They always found excuses when things got tough. But the successful ones? They figured it out, no matter the circumstances. That was how innovation happened. That was what separated failure from greatness. That was the mindset of an entrepreneur. He raised his fist in the air as he said it, loud and proud. Javier stared at him, clearly not convinced. Night fell over the camp, and most of the orcs had turned in for the evening. Lloyd sat outside alone, perched on a rock, chin resting on his hands as he stared off in thought. He needed a plan. The structure was built. The orcs were counting on him. All he had to do now was make ice in a region that had probably never seen it. He had an idea. He'd build a mould for the block. Once that was done, he'd get Padong and Bangal to haul water from the lake and pour it in. That part was easy. The problem was freezing it. There was ice magic in this world, so it had to be possible. He just didn't know how it worked. He remembered the mana flows he sensed while training the Azrahan core technique. There had been subtle differences in the way it moved, sharp in one moment, slow in another. If he could shift the properties of mana, maybe he could create the same cooling effect. It wasn't much to go on, but it was something. A slow grin crept onto his face. He wasn't a master of mana manipulation, but he didn't need to be. If he could imitate the effect, just enough to get the job done, that would be enough. The mould had been built and filled with water by now. Enough time had passed for the idea to take shape and the setup to be ready. Lloyd knelt beside it, pressed his palm against the surface, and closed his eyes. The mana inside the water pulsed against his senses. He focused, tried to guide it. It resisted at first, slippery and unfocused, but he kept pushing. Behind him, Javier leaned against the outer wall of the building, arms crossed. Watching Lloyd try to figure out magic like this, on the fly, without theory or guidance, looked reckless. At least that's what he used to think. But from what he could tell, Lloyd was making progress. Javier let out a quiet breath. Once Lloyd decided he was going to do something, there really was no stopping him. Kneeling by the mould, Lloyd kept his hands submerged as cold mist began to rise around him. The temperature shifted, barely at first, then steadily more. A notification flashed in his vision. You have developed a new application of the Azrahan core technique. Technique has leveled up. Current level 2. A few days later, the building was finally complete. Insulated, sealed, and cold. Inside, Arosh and his father stood near the centre, arms folded as they breathed out faint clouds of mist. A thick block of ice sat on the stone floor, its surface frosted and solid. The chill in the room was undeniable. They looked at each other, then at the ice, then back at Lloyd. He'd actually done it. Lloyd stepped forward and tapped the block with the back of his hand. The sound echoed dully through the space. All that was left now was to finish the insulation. Once that was done, they'd have their cold room. The job was as good as complete. The orcs were speechless. For a people who had hunted daily just to keep up with spoilage, this changed everything. Meat could be preserved, food could last. It wasn't just a building anymore, it was freedom from constant worry. The chief raised a hand, voice booming with pride. In celebration of this success, he declared the entire village would enjoy a triceps day. Lloyd didn't even try to hide his smirk. He turned to Javier, then pointed to the ice. That was the mind of an entrepreneur, and he made sure Javier got the message. Javier stared at his face. He didn't need to hear the words. He already knew what Lloyd was thinking, and annoyingly, he had to admit, Lloyd was right. Now that construction was complete, the orcs had gathered in the centre of the village. The chief stood before the crowd, his voice steady as he thanked Lloyd for fulfilling his promise. Lloyd gave a small nod in response. He said the chief was too kind. He had simply honoured the contract. But the chief continued. The Sand and Steel tribe didn't have an easy relationship with humans. A contract alone didn't guarantee trust. Just because something was written didn't mean it would be upheld. And yet, Lloyd had kept his word. Now they knew he could be trusted. The chief raised his hand and announced that they wished to make a vow. He drew a deep breath and straightened his back, chest pushed out with pride. Then with a mighty cry, he declared, From this moment on, the Sand and Steel tribe and the Frontera family were blood brothers. The villagers erupted into cheers. All across the square, the orcs struck a pose, flexed arms, fists raised like proud bodybuilders, and roared in unison. Blood brothers! The chief turned to Lloyd and told him plainly they were friends now, and any enemy of the Frontera family would be the enemy of the tribe as well. A system notification flashed before Lloyd's eyes. The orc tribe has accepted you as a true friend. Approval rating increased, RP plus 100. Lloyd grinned, pumped a fist in front of his chest and shouted back, "Long live the Sand and Steel tribe!" After a long journey, Lloyd finally returned home. He walked through the heart of town with confident strides, followed by 120 towering orcs. The effect was immediate. Citizens froze in place. Shopkeepers dropped what they were holding. Some ran for cover. Others just stood there, wide-eyed and shaking. Lloyd glanced around at the reactions and let out a quiet sigh. Right, he thought. Might be a good time to make an announcement. If people didn't understand the orcs were allies now, panic would only spread. Orcs weren't exactly known for putting humans at ease. When he finally arrived at the manor, he spotted the Baron watching from one of the upper windows. Even though he'd known about the alliance, his face said he wasn't entirely comfortable with it. Still, Lloyd had more pressing tasks at hand. He needed to find a few wealthy merchants willing to move the treasure he'd acquired from the orc camp. On top of that, there was still a pile of items taken from the dark sorcerer's lair that needed sorting. Lloyd sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by items he'd hauled back from the orc camp and Lupellen's cave. Stacks of loot, strange tools, and magical relics cluttered the space. Gold and silver were easy enough to offload to merchants, but he wasn't interested in just cash. Not yet. There could be something useful here. Something powerful. And if there was, he didn't intend to overlook it. Javier stood behind him, arms crossed, and asked if there was anything valuable in the dark sorcerer's belongings. Lloyd said he wasn't sure. He wanted to go through everything properly before selling any of it, just in case something useful was buried inside. Then he froze. His expression shifted. His eyes locked on something inside the book he was holding. Without another word, he grabbed it and stood up fast. He called out that he was heading to the mine and left the rest to Javier as he bolted from the room. Lloyd burst into the mine, calling out for Tordes. Eventually, the tired worker emerged from the tunnels, face streaked with dirt and shoulders heavy with exhaustion. Lloyd stepped forward and placed both hands on his shoulders. His excitement was hard to miss. He reminded Tordes of the contract he'd signed, the absurd one that locked him into 520 years of labour. Tordes remembered. His expression said it all. Still grinning, Lloyd told him not to worry. He'd found a spell buried in one of the dark sorcerer's books, one that could turn Tordes into a ghoul he could control. Now he could actually work the 520 years off. Wasn't that amazing? Tordes didn't respond. He stood there, unmoving, as if his soul had just left his body. Lloyd repeated himself, beaming. Wasn't this incredible? Still nothing. Slowly, the smile dropped from his face. His expression turned cold as he stared at Tordes in silence. Then he asked, face still cold, why he was the only one excited about this arrangement. He told Tordes to smile. After a moment, the man blinked and obeyed. Sort of. His mouth forced its way into a smile, while tears welled up in his eyes and slid down his cheeks. Lloyd seemed satisfied with that. He snapped his fingers, pointed at him, and told him to keep up the good work, then turned and walked away, clearly in high spirits. The system chimed in with a prompt. The Lord of the Underworld was impressed and would like to offer Lloyd a position. He dismissed it immediately, assuming the system was joking. But the system clarified that it was serious. Lloyd, far too pleased with himself to care, didn't hear a word of it. Later, Lloyd made his way through the halls of the manor. He figured it was time to speak with the Baron. His first stop was the office, but it was empty. Just as he stepped back out into the corridor, he spotted a maid passing by and stopped her to ask if she'd seen his father. She told him the Baron had guests and was currently in the reception room. Lloyd asked who the visitors were. The maid replied, Mr. Shiloh and Mr. Meatloaf. The answer made him pause. Then his expression twisted, something sly creeping across his face. So the lenders were here. And the moment he realised it, the shift in his face was enough to make the maid flinch. She asked what kind of expression that was supposed to be. He didn't answer. He was already headed down the hall. In the reception room, Arcos sat across from the two lenders. They were already mid-discussion. The lenders laid out their proposal. If the Frontera family handed over the mine, they would consider 90% of the remaining debt repaid. Arcos looked unsure. They told him it was a generous deal and asked why he was hesitating. There was a knock at the door. A voice asked to come in. Arcos answered, and the door opened. Lloyd stood in the doorway, wearing an obviously fake smile. He greeted the lenders and said it had been a while. He hoped they'd been well. Meatloaf instantly pulled out a piece of paper and held it out. This time they had an official invitation, so Lloyd couldn't threaten them any longer. Lloyd gasped, looking impressed. Of course they did. They were men of intellect, after all. Still smiling, he said he couldn't help but overhear their generous offer. He asked if he might offer one of his own. Meatloaf scowled, saying he didn't want to hear anything from Lloyd. Lloyd told him anyway. From now on, the repayments would switch to smaller monthly fees, and the interest rate would be lowered. Meatloaf pointed at Lloyd and shouted, "How dare he!" He already told him he didn't intend to listen to anything he proposed. Still swaying slightly with that same fake smile, he clasped his hands and said it didn't seem fair. They could spit out bad offers, but he wasn't allowed to make any of his own. That kind of thing made him angry. Heavy footsteps began with a loud thud behind him. A large orc stepped into the room and stood directly behind Lloyd. The lenders recoiled in fear. The orc glared at them and warned that anyone who caused trouble for the Frontera family would be destroyed. Lloyd tapped the orc's chest and told him it wasn't that serious. They weren't being hostile. The orc replied that he definitely heard hostility in their voices earlier. The lenders were now clinging to each other in silence. He and the orc both stared at them. Lloyd's smile stretched wide, unhinged and unsettling. The orc added that if they hurt the Frontera family's feelings, he'd tear them apart. Oink. A short while later, the lenders were seen sprinting away from the mansion gates, flailing as if death itself was chasing them. Whatever negotiations had taken place, they clearly hadn't gone in their favour. Back inside, Lloyd sat on a couch in the reception room, flipping through the newly signed contract. It was a major win, far better terms, significantly less interest, and the debt was finally on track to be paid off properly. Sure, he could have crushed them completely, but he wasn't a criminal. Probably. Arcos remained close, observing him silently. He gave Lloyd a nod of approval and thanked him for handling the situation. Lloyd handed the contract to his father and told him to keep it safe. He added that business was booming, the mines were running well, and with the new terms they'd be free of debt in no time. But then, his expression shifted. He glanced at Arosh, who was standing beside them. Lloyd smiled uneasily and pointed out that the orcs ate a lot. A whole lot. Probably 10 times as much as a regular person. If they didn't figure something out soon, they'd find themselves back in debt before they knew it. Arcos froze. And just like that, their next problem had already begun to take shape.